We'll go to Mr. Luetkemeyer for questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Nielsen, let's follow up, continue with your discussion here. You hit on an interesting problem here, and one that I hear all the time as I go back and talk to my local folks in the district, and that's the one where, especially with the builders and contractors and developers, where there's a huge disconnect between the regulatory officials here in D.C. and what's going on in the district where it affects the people who make the livings and get our economy going, from the standpoint that they're forcing the local examiners, the ones in the field, are forcing the banks to restrict credit call notes that really there's nothing wrong with them other than the fact that the market's kind of flipped upside down with regards to the values they've been performing and never been past due, and yet they're being called. It's a huge problem, and I'm glad to hear your testimony along that fact. It can just, again, confirms what's going on out there. And one of the questions I got is, what is the present inventory of homes that's sitting there ready to be purchased? That's people have moved out of, or how big is the inventory, and how long would it take to get rid of it?
That's a very fluid question, and I'm certainly not an economist and couldn't give you a number, but I can tell you that the overhang is huge. But what you're talking about earlier, the banks calling performing loans is what really concerns us too, because a lot of our builders have land that's ready to build at this point that they're holding, but because banks are in essence reappraising that land, and they're forcing home builders or owners of that land to put additional equity into pay the bank additional equity to keep the loan in balance. And if they can't do that, they're foreclosing on that. When they foreclose on it, the bank then sells that at a distressed value and reduces the value of every other piece of property around it, because an appraiser has to look at that when they appraise a property, which is another problem, the appraisal problem. Both of those are addressed in our legislation.
It's a death spiral I get involved in. I had a situation where I had a developer that was so big, he had 4 different banks involved, and if they all foreclosed on him because he was bankrupt, if they all foreclosed on him, it'd drive all the prices in the whole area down to a level that everybody would lose everything else. All the good loans would suddenly be worthless.
Right.
I mean, that's how big and how bad the situation can get.
And we will get you the number of foreclosed
that's fine.
houses,
Thank you.
houses on them.
Mr. Schabel, I guess you hit on a couple points here that are of interest to me. Saying that the CFPA and the whole bill as a whole here, Dodd-Frank, really undermines the certainty of what businesses need in order to be able to continue to operate. And as I go out and talk to my folks, over and over again, the key word is certainty. They can't go anywhere because they're not certain of the laws, not certain of the regulations, not certain of the taxes, not certain of, if you get to manufacturers, is not certain of trade policy. And this, you use the word arbitrary regulation. I kind of like that. That's kind of a neat way to put what's going on here. They come in and they arbitrarily seem to, without any sort of documentation or real problem there, all of a sudden they're arbitrarily imposing rules and regulations on things. And you made a comment in your testimony with regards to them being able to come in and take away some of the businesses and come in and repossess or close down. Would you elaborate on it just a little bit? Because I think it's a very important point we make here.
Well, from my reading of the Orderly Liquidation Authority, they can seize certain enterprises when they feel that the enterprise is in trouble of potentially going under. And what's interesting is that they chose not to fall back on bankruptcy provisions or really any form of due process. They just can kind of arbitrarily make that decision. And if you're on the other side of that, as a customer of one of these larger firms, you could depend on these customers for clearing, for settlement, for stock loan, for a whole variety of services that are critical to your business. But the downside is the contracts that you have, even if you put provisions in your contracts to get away from them if they go bankrupt, they've specifically nullified that in what I've seen. And that, from my perspective, if I'm on the other side of that situation and my service provider has suddenly been randomly seized, I can't break my contracts and I can't go someplace else unless the FDIC for a period of 90 days gives me authority. And as a small firm dealing in trading, 90 days or 9 days, it doesn't matter, you'll be out of business. It's a very scary situation.
Well, I was talking to somebody today, and their comment was that it may be even unconstitutional to do this very thing because it's pretty arbitrary about where they're doing it, and there's no basis there for them to be able to go in and basically take over a company without some sort of due process, which is basically what they're doing here. Just very quickly, my time's about out, with regards to interchange fees. Mr. Boris, I believe it is, just kind of curious, how many businesses do you have in your alliance?
We have about 8,000 businesses
8,000
in
businesses.
13
Do
states.
you know roughly what amount of the business transacted uses debit cards?
I don't know that. I can get that for you, though.
I'm just kind of curious from the standpoint that if debit cards go away, how impactful is that going to be to your merchants?
If debit cards were to disappear,
Mm-hmm.
implying that debit cards will disappear by bringing those debit card fees more in line with what can be afforded.
Well, by breaking the folks who can't afford to no longer provide a service without being able to be paid for it, that's my question. If they can't pay for it, where are they going to, and they'll pull the service or go someplace else to find other monies to be able to continue to provide a service free?
Well, I think that they may indeed go someplace else to try to find some of that money.
Well, my
I don't know
question
that
is
they're
how
gonna try to
impactful
recover
that
all
will,
of it.
how impactful that will be to your businesses. I mean, at some point, I'm kind of curious. You're asking the federal government to come in here, and you seem to be approving this to be able to set a price. How would you like to have somebody come in and set the prices of the products that you sell?
Right. Well, what I can say is that in my experience with my business and my experience with other merchant businesses, we've sort of been at the mercy and still conduct our business at the mercy of credit card interchange fees, which have changed dramatically over the last several years, both in transaction fees as well as in discount rates, the difference between non-qualified cards, mid-qualified cards, and swiped cards. I think that it's time for us to get some sort of fairness and justice in the marketplace for
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
merchants.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Renacci.